Hey, listeners. This week is a little bit of departure from the norm. I don't usually do this, but myself and my husband were on another podcast with Dr. Stephanie Holmes, and we were telling a part of our story. And I am bringing that podcast to you guys this week. It is a bit of a vulnerable moment for us. However, I believe in being transparent and using my story, our story, to help as many people as possible. So I hope that you enjoy. Thank you.
Welcome back to Neurodiverse Christian Couples. I'm Stephanie,
I'm Dan.
and we have some guests with us today, doctors Jeff and Mary Jones. And before we let them introduce themselves, you've probably been following along and noticed that Dan's been doing a Dan Reacts to some of the chapters in the Uniquely Us book. And Dr. Mary and I have already kind of discussed some of the research behind that. We didn't really feel an reacts would be an appropriate response to the chapter. We thought, why not introduce you as a couple and talk a little bit more about your story, your marriage story. So we're going to toss it to y'all to introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump right in.
I'll let you go first.
All right. It's Jeff. And Mary. We currently been married for a couple decades, have 5 children. As Stephanie said, we're both physicians. It's kind of the basics.
Well, you were supposed to introduce yourself. You want to speak about yourself?
I introduced you as a couple. Now, Jeff, introduce yourself. What kind of physician and medical field are you in?
Yeah, did work in emergency medicine for 20 years before a finger injury required a transition to telemedicine. We grew up in the Midwest, and we lived for a while in the Midwest before relocating to the South, where we've been for the last 12 years or so, 15 years.
Okay. Now, our listeners might know you already, Mary, but will you give a brief introduction of yourself as well?
Yep. So my name is Mary Jones, and like Stephanie mentioned, and you guys probably know if you've seen Stephanie's podcast, I am a pediatrician specializing in autism. I am married to Jeff, and like you said, we have 5 kids. We live in Alabama currently. And yeah, I have sort of made it my mission to bring awareness to autism from the autistic person's standpoint and from the neurotypical person's standpoint, as well as family support.
Well, we are glad to have you. Dan,
Yes.
I'll let you lead us off.
All right. So, Jeff, how about you give us how did we get here? What is the journey for you from not being aware of your on the spectrum to now fully aware, fully accepting all of that? And toss in maybe maybe Stephanie will get to this in a follow-up, but mix that up with some of your medical knowledge and what that did or did not allow you to think through.
Yeah, so I would say that there was about 45 years of no journey and then 5 years of progressive. Um, so, sorry, just had a technical issue. For my first 45 years of life, I had no thought about anything being really particularly different. No one had suggested it, and I felt like I was getting by pretty normally. I guess I felt like my family and relationships were pretty normal. In retrospect, I see a lot of things differently. But then, about 5 years ago, when Mary first brought up the idea, and I started learning about it, and she started learning a lot more about neurodiversity. It's been kind of a gradual increased acceptance, and particularly after testing just a few months ago, total acceptance of me being autistic. And so, yeah, looking back and with more and more knowledge, and I think more and more societal knowledge and acceptance and um, open discussion, I can kind of see in retrospect how that played into all parts of my life, and how I was able to kind of convince myself and others were able to convince themselves that the way I was just kind of aspects of my personality and frankly intelligence. It's kind of the main thing that kind of covered things up or accommodated and permitted me to function as I did.
Yeah, sometimes, Jeff, when am working with someone who's a clinician, be it medical or psychological, or maybe a master life coach, somebody who works with people or someone who works in the diagnosis field of some kind, it's like, wait a minute, I'm a doctor, I'm a clinician. I should have seen this. I should have noticed this. That's not what I learned about. And so you're in what's called the lost generation of adult autistic men. So this is brought to you. You're a doctor. I would imagine the autistic part of your brain and the medical part of your brain maybe starts running through what you think the criteria are or what you think autism is. What was that part like for you as a doctor?
Yeah, I didn't really deal with autism in emergency medicine and adult medicine. And so I think that might have been as much a part of Mary's story as anything, being a pediatrician and dealing more with autism. She can. So I didn't really deal with it from that regard. But when I did start to read about it, my impression was, yeah, I have these aspects. Maybe I don't have enough to be completely diagnostic. So I was kind of hair splitting with the criteria and thinking, really, I thought that even if I didn't have enough characteristics to completely meet a diagnosis, that I had enough for it to be a very useful thing to learn about and to apply to my life and particularly to my marriage. So even before I had full acceptance of absolute DSM 4 or 5, whatever criteria, I thought, well, this is really applies enough to be useful.
Okay. Do you have a follow up? Do you have a curious question?
Mm, no, not
Still
right now.
thinking? All right. Sometimes I don't know when when the curiosity's thinking up there. So then for you, Jeff, you mentioned kind of in your introduction that being gifted, high IQ, obviously, emergency medicine, did that make it tougher? Because a lot of the people we work with are high IQ and gifted and exceptional in their intelligence. Did that make it harder to accept the autism spectrum?
Yeah, I think because yeah, I had already always gone through both through my God-given talents and in retrospect to cover up for the autism and really really being kind of addicted as much as anything to performance. And so I leaned into performance and excelling, um both because that helped me to fit in and that seemed to kind of uh, get me the degree of attention and relationships I was comfortable with. So yeah, it did make it kind of hard because I'd always sort of excelled, at least in the things that I did. I probably avoided all the things I was challenged in, but I excelled in the things that I did. And so it was kind of weird to look around and be like, well, I've gotten here, I've done this and this, and how can I be so deficient in major areas and nobody really pointed it out before. So that was confusing.
Yeah, I've had people say, "How could I have lived 41, 51, 61 years and not known this?" And it's like,
Yeah.
well, that's kind of part of it. That's why we're educating people.
Mhm.
So, Mary, your field is pediatrics, which is definitely where maybe autism is going to fall. Um, and so we kind of processed through on another show a child that was on the spectrum and like, I'm a pediatrician, but just because I am pediatrician, our children still have pediatricians. So I was relying on the pediatrician I'm the mom. I was mom brain, not pediatrician brain. But now, kind of in the marriage situation, bringing that up to Jeff, what was that like? Having that discussion, was the son diagnosed first? Was that the order of progression?
No, so I actually diagnosed Jeff first, and that so that was one reason why I really think he pushed against the diagnosis, because he saw it as me um, just trying to have an excuse for my problems in the marriage. And having so we had been married 15 years when um, or 14 years, when I really literally was sitting on the couch one night after an argument, like another circular rabbit hole, completely frustrating argument, where he ended up shutting down and leaving the room at the end, like usual. That was kind of our pattern. And just being like, Lord, what, there's something I'm missing here. And so I literally heard in my head, he's autistic, and started looking that up. And that's how I found you. And so for the first probably 3 years after he was diagnosed, even though our son, we pretty quickly realized that he was exhibiting some of the same traits as his dad. And so he was diagnosed just maybe like 6 or 8 months after um, Jeff, my unofficial diagnosis of Jeff. And, despite that, he still was not on board with the diagnosis, as you may remember, Stephanie, because that's when we found you and Dan, and you guys started, we started therapy with you. And so, really, there was a lot of pushback, and a lot of frustration associated with that for me, because I was convinced and he met all the criteria. But some days he would say, I'm maybe a little bit on the spectrum, maybe not on the spectrum. Other days he would be like, I'm not all autistic, like that is not me, I don't identify with that. And so this summer is when I requested that he get the official diagnosis. And he actually just received it 2 weeks ago. He said months, but he got his official, he was given the GARS, and he got his official diagnosis that he is autism level 2 with significant support needs. And that shocked both of us, the level 2 part. But then thinking back, it is like, yeah, there's definitely, um, that resonated with both of us. And he does, even in spite of the fact that he is a genius, literally, he has significant social support needs.
But that's a story. It's kind of interesting, this part of your story, because in many situations, the wives have been doing some Googling, like, why are we having these arguments? Why are we having circular arguments? Is my husband a narcissist? And then narcissist leads down to autism. And so, for many other wives who bring it up to their husbands, they're not clinicians or doctors. And in this
Mhm.
case, and usually the husband will say, "You're not a doctor or clinician. You can't say that about me." And so that's not really the excuse here. That's not even an out, a duck or a hide maneuver in this situation. Um, so there, we had guests on previously, Shauna and Kevin Meek. And
I have a
oh, you have a
follow-up.
follow up?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Before we go there,
Before we
Sorry.
do that,
okay.
Jeff, when Mary brings you the autism idea and you waver, I guess maybe tell me about what is the thinking behind some of those. Oh, I accept some of it today. I see that today. I don't see any of it. What goes on in that kind of deliberation?
Um, so I think some of it was my own stereotypes of what autism looked like. And some of it was just there's, a lot of different ways it presents, and so some I clearly don't have. And then there's just trying to parse out what's personality and what's neurodiversity. So I think it was just trying to figure it all out. trying to figure out what was neurodivergence and what was personality and what was background and upbringing and personality and culture and Western culture. And uh, I guess maybe it's hard too from your own perspective versus an outside perspective looking at you, and you've just always been that way and it always seemed normal to you. So I don't know if that answers your questions, but
What was the tipping point that said, you know what, I'm all in on this?
well, I think this recent testing, even though I said it didn't really make a big difference to me before and after, was kind of the final tipping point, final straw. But I think it really has been super gradual as our family with a lot of neurodivergence has learned and talked a lot about how each of our brains work. And uh, I've learned, as Mary's learned a ton about this, as she's gone into this field kind of with her vicariously, and just become more and more aware of, how it can present differently and all the ways that it does fit me.
No. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Good. All right. I wanted to let you jump in. Good. Thank you for advocating for yourself. So I was mentioning that we had another couple on a few months ago, Kevin and Shauna Meek, and their story was a sex addiction diagnosis and then an autism diagnosis. And so I think I do want to start into that part of the journey because there are many, many people we are finding co-occurring with undiagnosed ADHD and undiagnosed autism into adulthood, strong co-occurring between some kind of addiction. One that is very prevalent is sex or porn or something in that nature, but it could be substance or gambling or something dealing with anxiety or social anxiety or the relationship struggles in a way that's unhealthy. And so that's kind of another layer that enters into the picture where neurodiversity was one layer in one lens, but then another lens comes upon that. And so I'm going to toss that to you, Mary, first, because the impact of one is like, okay, autism label, we've got it, we have a thing, let's figure this out, we're doctors, we're smart, we can do this. But then this other piece comes in. Talk a little bit about finding that out and this next layer of addiction and how it impacts you.
Yeah. So after a couple of years after the autism diagnosis, and we had started with, counseling, and we had been with you for, about almost 2 years, and things really weren't changing. We moved to the Dominican Republic, and things got worse instead of better, even though we had really, or I had leaned in, and Jeff was kind of sort of leaned into the therapy that you and Dan were offering us. And so just wanting to know, like, why is this not at all working, and just really feeling deep down that there was another piece missing, something was not right. And I didn't really seek out what that was. I mean, I was seeking it out. We were in therapy and talking about, like, things to do to make things better, and none of it was working. And I'm missing something, and it had nothing to do with my medical knowledge. It's just, as a woman and my intuition, something is going on. I am missing something. So once again, I uh, was really praying about and asking the Lord to, like, reveal to me what was going on. And during that time, I was telling Jeff, like, you're hiding something from me. Something is wrong. There is something missing. You are not who you say you are. And unfortunately, Christmas Eve, December 2020, um, the Holy Spirit, because we're Christians, we're believers, spoke to me and said, ask Jeff about pornography. And I had this inner battle for about 15 minutes, like going back and forth with the Lord, like, no, that's not.
Why? Why do you want me to ask that? That's not it. Um, and so, anyway, I asked, and he did not admit at that time, but just the look on his face, like I knew that that's what it was, and that it, also that it was probably more than just that. And so, yeah, so I called you, Stephanie, um, and asked you if I could divorce him, and you said no. We gotta do some more. um,
Well, I don't
um,
have permission. I don't grant permission. Now, in the means of our discussion, right? I have no like get out of jail free cards. I don't
yep,
get to say yes or no to anyone.
yep,
But based on our discussion and what you were seeking and wanting, that did
yep,
not seem like the
yep,
the solution that you really wanted.
yep,
Um, at that
yep.
time. So lest everyone like be like, okay, let's get in touch with Dr. Stephanie. She can say yes
No,
or no.
no. I just we were in therapy with them, and she was as frustrated as I was. So like she's who I called because, it was like, this is what we've been missing. What do I do next? And I was really angry and upset at the time. So that's why that was my first question.
And
And
like a coach or
so
therapist, you got to know like what's your specialty. And so sexual
yep,
addiction, porn addiction was not our specialty. So
yep,
y'all had to get some additional care and support.
exactly. Yep, yep. And yeah, it was absolutely devastating to learn that the autism diagnosis was not like devastating. I mean, I had some grief over that, but I didn't like it wasn't like you said, it was like, okay, this is what we're dealing with. Let's lean in and let's get to it and let's go and we can figure this out and I can learn your language and you can learn my language and we got this. But the sex addiction that was like devastating. So he we I sent him away for some intensive counseling and stayed in the DR with the kids, and it was the worst time of my life. I would say, or I thought that was. Since then, there have been other worse times, but yeah, I lost like 20 pounds and was in bed all day long for like 2 months, and so it was not. It was yeah devastating.
Well, how would you like to follow up on that?
Oh, wow. Jeff, you think there was anything, looking historically on this, do you think there was anything related between those two, the autism and the porn sex addiction, as a coping mechanism? Just what do you think was going on there? Were they completely unrelated? Just how do you how do you rationalize what was going on in the moment?
Yeah, no, I do think in retrospect that it was related. I think that having the undiagnosed autism, um, like Mary said, we were surprised the degree which I tested level 2 significant or considerable support or whatever needed. So I had, learned to cover it up basically. And what the psychologist said is my intelligence was the one thing that was my only support or accommodation, really. And so I had learned through performance basically to come across as okay. And so, I was really had learned to hide for 4.5 decades to perform and appear perfect and to hide any differences or imperfections. And so I remember I always felt really safe and comfortable when I was doing what I knew I should be doing. In college and medical school, I knew I just needed to be studying. I remember in residency, if I was unsure of what to be doing and I was in the middle of a procedure, I felt good because I knew that's the only thing I needed to be doing, the only thing I should be doing, and I felt safe and comfortable. But then other times I felt anxious if I didn't know exactly what I needed to be doing, or what needed to be done, what I should be doing. And so, yeah, I think porn became a way of escaping that discomfort, and felt like, it was an escape. So I learned to hide. That as a Christian had a lot of associated shame, which created more hiding. I had learned to just kind of present a perfect image. And so, yeah, the porn was an escape from anxiety. And that kind of actually intensified through our relational angst and conflict. And so that was really distressing to me, even though I don't need the same level of connection as Mary. It was super distressing to me when we had angst and conflict. And so that, I think, even increased the desire to escape in that way.
So it almost sounds like then a perpetual circle, a cycle that the marriage is already in distress. You are already kind of struggling and working through the challenges of the neurodiversity. Now, this other thing is on top of it, which I'm going to ask you a little bit in a moment, Mary, about betrayal trauma, because sometimes people think, oh, it's just porn. That's not betrayal. That's not a big deal. It's not real infidelity. So I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. But it sounds like then what you're saying, Jeff, is there'd be some kind of distress in the relationship, and your escape mechanism was to do this, which would cause more distress for Mary, which would cause more distress in the relationship, which almost built this kind of
Yeah,
negative
it
cycle.
fed on itself.
So what
Mhm.
was that like for you? Sometimes people say, Mary, to women, like, well, it's not a big deal, it's not an actual affair, all men do it, you just have to forgive, you're really making this a bigger issue than it is. It's just porn, Mary. First of all, kind of address people who would say that and talk about, you said you were in bed for 2 months and you lost 20 pounds and this was really distressing to you. So you kind of talk a little bit through your journey of what this betrayal felt like.
Yeah, I would say to people that would think that that's what society wants you to think, and because it's so normalized. But until you have been in that situation, been betrayed by someone you thought was completely faithful to you, and they're the person that you trusted the most in the world, um, that you won't understand. And so, yeah, I was absolutely devastated because we had been married for 16 years at that point, and I had no idea that this was going on. And but I knew something was, because like he was like aloof and isolated from me, and our relationship was just like this toxic dance of, I would be completely lonely and isolated, and he would be doing his own thing, I would be doing my own thing. It would get to a tipping point where I was really upset and yelling, and felt like a crazy person most of the time. And then he would then like overcompensate for that for a couple days or a week, and then it was even worse than before. Part of that was the autism, but now I know he was really binging on pornography, and it was affecting, that was the mistress, that was the other woman. It was, and it wasn't just pornography online. Like, he had the ability, and maybe this is because of his autism, to look at any woman and then, picture her as me, or picture me as her. And so it affected like our intimate sexual relationship. I felt like very objectified. And so had eventually just stopped engaging in that for like months and months and months, because it was so weird. And so it affects every aspect of your marriage. And add to that that our son, who's now 17, knew what his dad was doing from the time he was 8 years old, and I had no idea. And he was monitoring his dad's usage on the computer. He could figure out like when he was going on, and he would. He told us later that he would pray that the Lord would make his dad stop. whenever he realized that he was doing that. And he would say, Mom, sometimes it was like 4 or 5 times a day. And he would be on there for like an hour, 2 hours. And so he knew exactly. And so finding that out, like, even made it like worse. So, um, yeah.
I think I'll ask this question, and if you don't like this question, I'll edit it out like it never happened. But there was a part, Mary, in one of our discussions where that kind of added to the betrayal and anger is like in some parts you thought like I'm giving Jeff space, like he's a doctor, he's tired, he has these shifts, and so I'm like giving him space to rest, and then finding out in that space of rest that might be when the behaviors were occurring, and that adding like another layer on top of it, that I feel like I'm serving my husband and giving him what he needs. I'm gonna take extra time with the kids. I'm a doctor and I'm working and doing things too, but I'm gonna take this to give him that rest time. What was that part like? Do you feel okay answering that?
Yeah. Yeah, it was like everybody knew, like, when dad goes downstairs, like, nobody bother him, nobody, because he's tired and he's working all these shifts and he needs his, rest and space. And yeah, to come to find out that, it was happening like right under our noses, that that was that did something to me as well. And the trust issues that it broke down trust that is still not restored. Just because I felt like he was taking advantage of all of us for his addiction. And I come from a family that has a strong addiction history. And you know to like tell yourself, I will never be married to an addict. I will, but not under really understanding like all the types of addiction there are, and the trauma that I went through as a child. That cycle repeated itself despite my best efforts. There was a lot of shame for me too, and a lot of guilt for me too. Self worth, self esteem issues, all of that had to be faced in all of this.
So I got another one.
Okay.
So Jeff's stress, if you was to just look at it on the surface, just with a naive perspective, it would seem like an ER doctor is more stressful than being at home. I've never been an ER doctor. I've only watched it on television. And it might or might not be anything like that. But somebody rushes in, their arm fell off or whatever, and you're in a hurry. You've got to make something happen. You've got, the goal is what can we do in the moment? From a stress perspective, that feels bigger than coming home and engaging. So the question is, so that we can understand, what does it mean to actually say I don't, the stress cycle. Contrast doctor stress with life stress, so we can all understand that maybe there's a confidence in, you know what, yeah, that guy's arm fell off, but I know exactly what to do here, regardless of what this picture looked like, compares to maybe I get home and I don't know what to do. And that stress, just talk about that dichotomy of what that could have looked like, that also fed this.
Yeah. Um, well, I would say that real life relationships are more stressful. In the ER, it's very concrete, and I knew what to do. I'm well trained, and I have a pretty low key personality. The nurses would say I never got stressed, and so that didn't really stress me out. I kind of enjoyed the variety of intensity and pace, and slow and busy, and low acuity and high acuity. So that was a lot less stressful and easier to understand, because medicine is relatively black and white. There's an art and a science, but it's relatively black and white. And relational stuff was confusing to me. So when people would say, especially Mary would say, I don't feel connected, that was almost like a different language to me. I didn't understand. Like, I love you. You say you love me. We're together. We're talking. Um, but what does that mean? To not feel connected? I just didn't get that. And so that kind of stress, any interpersonal conflict and disagreement was to me a lot more stressful and distressing than medicine.
I think I want to sit on that just for a minute and let neurotypical spouses hear this for a moment, that an ER doctor is saying what he experienced in the ER was
Yep.
no stress compared to coming home and not knowing what to say in the relationship. When something like we're not connected, that hit your stress meter way higher than, as Dan was saying, someone coming in with their arm detached and you had to be the one to fix it. The ebb and flow of the ER was not stressful compared to being at home and not knowing how to interact in a relationship. Would that be accurate summary?
Yeah, yeah.
And that
Mary,
was, if I could,
yeah,
uh,
I'm interested in your perspective of that same topic.
yeah, so that was evidenced by the fact that he was always at the ER. He would pick up extra shifts. He would work. We would talk about, you need to cut down because we didn't need the money. Like, you're gone all the time. And he would say, okay, I'm going to, but then he would like pick up more shifts, because that was like his world. That was his safe place. Like, he was known for his, ability to be calm under fire and to see lots of patients and control the whole ER. He was the medical director. Everything there was affirming to his skill and ability to just like master it. And then, coming home, I'm lonely, I'm sad, I'm, you know, forced or leaning on him for support and care that, I wasn't getting. And, that, so yeah, that I could see that that was way more stressful because he didn't know how to give what I needed and what the kids needed.
So I want to speak to clinicians out there, whether you're medical clinicians or psychological clinicians, that sometimes work is the passionate interest.
Mhm.
And so that's sometimes why this is missed, because people think, oh, the special or passionate interest has to be something really weird, odd, or eccentric. It's got to be coin collecting or baseball facts or things like that. But sometimes the field that one chose to go into work in, because I'm hearing, that's where you, Jeff, felt confident. I know what to do here. It's black and white. There's a procedure. It's predictable. As it's just interesting. I'm still processing. And ER is more predictable than my family. I'm still kind of letting that roll through my head a little bit. That that system was a system I know, and I know how it works. I know how to navigate that system. And
Mhm.
so, if you're out there and you're a diagnosing clinician, ask about work life balance. Ask about those extra shifts. Ask about work kind of coming home, because work can be that passion, because that's where the confidence is. There's so much more I want to talk about, but something we've never talked about on the show is
Before you move on, I want to reiterate the point that the confidence came from work. I want to
okay.
say that again because you don't see that. You don't get to see confidence. You're right. It's not something that walks around. Oh, I'm confident today. You don't walk in the door and your hat doesn't say I'm confident or I give you a meter. Uh, Jeff leaves the work. He comes home and may or may not even realize it himself that I'm walking into a different domain, and the strength of which I walked 10 minutes ago is now completely different than what it is when I press that door. And I just wanted that to be.
Okay, that's a good point. That's a good point. I am trying to keep us under an hour, y'all, because when we get in a really good conversation, sometimes we just keep going and keep going. But another important part of your story, because in many neurodiverse relationships, whether or not there is an addiction lens or not, there might be a time for therapeutic separations. And in your situation, y'all have had more than one. So I want to kind of talk about what leads y'all to deciding to separate, what that feels like from your perspective, Jeff, when someone says, hello, I would like for you not to live in the house anymore. I need to separate. Mary, for you to talk about why that was necessary and why that was healing, and kind of take us through the journey of your separations and coming back in the same home. And I think there's a second separation, and coming back in the same space. And in y'all's situation, y'all are living in two different countries at one point of this. So walk us through at what point. So devastated, we found this out. Take us to, okay, we need to have some kind of break or separation in the marriage temporarily.
Yeah. So right after we found out, I requested that with help from you and others that he go to intensives dealing with sex addiction as well as family trauma, and trying to sort of figure out like what led to the addiction. And and I had been through a lot of therapy at this point, so I knew that like childhood trauma plays a role in the trauma you inflict on others as well as yourself as an adult. And so I thought that that was going to be, really good. And it was. However, he came back from that. So he came to the US to do that like the day after Christmas Day. And then he came back, and I realized that I couldn't live in the same house with him. I couldn't sleep in the same bed with him. I couldn't make him dinner every night and hang out with the kids like everything was normal. So he was commuting back and forth for work at that time. So he the second time he went back after we found out, I told him that I need you to find another place to live. I can't be in the same place with you. I don't really know who you are. Like I felt like I had no idea who this person was, like who this man was that I'd been married to, for almost 20 years. And so it was scary for me. It was traumatic every time like I heard his voice or looked at him, or, and especially, and I just felt unsafe. And so I asked him to find a place, and he did. So we had to talk to the kids, and he moved. He got another place in the DR that was like close to where we lived. Um, I had to pick off. That's weird, but um, he um, moved out, and for me, it was about safety. It was about um, like not feeling like I was constantly re-traumatized by it.
So you're feeling, because I want to speak to that for one moment. Oftentimes in traditional therapy, biblical counselors, pastors would say, Mary, you can't work on your marriage in two separate places. You need to forgive and forget. You need an in-home separation. You need to stop holding grudges. You just need to forgive him. He's got the diagnosis. He's working on it. I mean, goodness, he just did this intensive for you. What's your problem, Mary? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so we had previously had in-home separation before I found out about the sex addiction when we were in the US still. I had mentioned briefly, I think before that, the sex piece was just such a stressful, traumatic event for me that I asked him to not sleep in the bedroom. And so we had done that for the whole 6 months before we moved to the DR. Um, and the reason why we came back together there was because we didn't have enough bedrooms for him to sleep somewhere else. So I was already feeling so uncomfortable that we weren't in the same bedroom. And we were in intensive therapy with you, and in coaching with Dan. And so we were doing everything we could with an in-home separation to try to fix things. Um, and so I knew that hadn't worked. Um, Actually, that was the worst of his binging, was when he was going back and forth between the US. And so I knew that hadn't worked. It wasn't going to work, and that I was being harmed every day, that I had to continue to be in the house with him. And I wasn't, it was so stressful that I was not being as effective as a mom as I wanted to be. And it was trickling down to my kids. And so, um, yeah, he had to go.
Jeff, many times when the men hear, I don't feel safe around you, you being in the home is harming me in a very black and white way. The husband might say, I would never hit you. I would never do anything to make you feel unsafe. How are you kind of parsing and thinking through? And she says, I don't trust you. I don't feel safe around you. Your being here in this house is harming me. Back then, how did you think through that? And where did you come to understanding that this situation was harming Mary, not just making her uncomfortable?
Well, I mean, it was scary and seemed like a step backwards and, not at all what I wanted. Um, but I think I came to see over time that she was, easily triggered by me. And that was traumatizing. And so it was taking two steps backwards for any half step forward. So, um, maybe I don't think I did see it at the time, but at least eventually I could see that we needed that time to heal, even if there wasn't a lot of active discussions or healing. I could at least give her that peace, that break, and try to do what I could to continue to show that I was, good father and supportive husband from as near as she was comfortable.
And I will say, like, during that time, we were both in um, uh, targeted addiction therapy for him, and I was in a uh, betrayed wives therapy and group. And eventually we both graduated, and I eventually led two groups, and so we were doing all of the things, that people said help and said you should do, um, to kind of be able to save the marriage.
I'm going to use this analogy, and I think it's obvious, but you guys will be able to confirm. If you break your leg, typically you get put in a cast where you can't use your leg. Intentionally, you don't want to use the leg while it's healing. The analogy then is, if the ability to run perhaps is the marriage, not using your leg for a while is to allow that one leg to get better all by itself before you re-engage in together activities. Is that fair way to look at um, therapeutic separation?
Yeah, I think for me it was I just I I didn't look at it like, okay, this is going to help the marriage eventually. I looked at it like, I've got to get away from this man. I cannot be in the same intimate spaces with him, um, because I don't know him, I don't trust him. It was like I all of a sudden realized that I was married to somebody that I didn't even know, after 16, 17 years. Like, I just felt like I don't know this person at all. And so for me it was all about safety. I had no idea if the marriage was going to last or continue, and really, like, I was always more on the side of, like, I would rather just divorce you, um but wanted to feel like, I was doing what the Lord wanted me to do for my family. And so that's why I was trying to get some breathing room to be able to even think clearly about what was next.
Right. So for you, it wasn't even about my leg is broken. It's in a cast. I don't know if I'm ever going to run again or if I'm going to do a marathon again. But right now, my focus is my leg and my healing. And I don't have the bandwidth to think about the other things I could do once my leg is healed. I just have to be healed first. That's kind of where you were, Mary.
Yep.
Okay.
Jeff, how did you view that? Because in that particular analogy, maybe there was some things you needed to do. There was some things you needed to do, but there's not an obvious cast, right? It's a what from the outside looks like a very healthy, we'll use the other leg to continue the analogy, that worked just as much as it did before, but obviously had some kind of internal something or other going on. Was that your, now it may not have been true based on what you said at the very beginning, but did you ever come to look at it that way of, you know what, I need me to be healthy, strong, stable, just for me before this relationship is going to have a chance to improve?
Yeah, I would have thought that I could, I guess, as far as the analogy, I would have thought that we could have continued to both heal whether we were apart or together. I think that the difference that I see now was that it's like one leg was harming the other, so that it was just so triggering for Mary to be around me all the time that that was what was different. I think I could have continued to heal, and whether I was with her or separated, although there may be some benefit of that additional independence and maturing and not leaning on her. But I think the biggest thing was just not being so continually triggering for her.
Okay, so I'm gonna add to this analogy and let's see if we're getting closer. So for you, Jeff, you could say, "Yeah, I think I could heal whether we're living in the same space or not. And in fact, I prefer we stay together." But then you're bringing in maybe one leg is harming the other leg. So if we add to the analogy for you, Mary, the reason why you could not heal in the same space with Jeff would be like you're carrying around the extra weight. You're trying while I'm trying to heal this leg or this piece of me that is broken and hurt and harmed, still trying to carry the weight and be expected to get up and walk, to be expected to carry on as nothing has happened, in quote, normal family life and keep family life normal. That extra weight was actually keeping the leg or the you from being able to heal because you feel like you're carrying Jeff and you're carrying his healing and carrying the marriage and family and not really being able to focus on your own healing. Would that kind of spread out Dan's analogy a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely. I was feeling the pressure and the weight of being this like forgiving wife, and that I needed to like hurry up and kind of get over it. And Jeff was kind of saying that in not so many words, and just feeling like the whole point was getting back together in the marriage instead of addressing like this horrible thing that had happened to me, and that had been lied to and betrayed almost from the minute that we said I do. And even before that, I found out some stuff that had happened even before we got married. And so I had to process all of that and realize that I had been like betrayed at the deepest level, and then to have to be in the home and try to pretend like things were not, I wouldn't even say normal, but like even doable. That was more than I could bear. And I had never really thought or knew what a therapeutic separation was. I found out about that because I was in therapy with a sex addiction specialist, who was the wife of the guy who was counseling Jeff, and she saw how traumatized I was, and she brought up, "Have you ever thought about?" She said, "Mary, you're not going to be able to heal. You're not going to be able to move forward like this. Have you thought about not letting Jeff come back and doing a therapeutic separation? And this is the procedure of that. And this is what we would continue to do in our therapy sessions while you are separated. And this is And she made sure to tell me the goal is not to reconcile the marriage. That we're not pushing you to do that, but we are pushing both of you to take charge of your own healing and do the work for yourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake. And I'll just, for those black and white listeners that are saying, well, I don't have porn or sex addiction, so this really doesn't apply to me. There can be therapeutic separation because there's dysregulated rage, because the two people keep getting in very toxic
Mhm,
argument cycles.
mhm,
It could be financial control. I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons that a relationship gets to the point like right now we're our worst versions of ourselves with
mhm,
each other. And just by focusing on, quote, the marriage, the relationship, and fixing the relationship, you're not looking at the two individuals that are making up that marriage relationship, because just getting good enough that you can get back together so everybody's happy and saying your marriage reconciled doesn't help if the two of you aren't coming to it from healed, whole places
mm,
to make an educated decision about getting back together for the right reasons, not just to save the marriage. And I
mhm,
think that's a very difficult concept in the Christian world, especially pastoral counseling, biblical counseling, Christian counseling, because the focus is so much on reconciliation
mhm,
versus I believe God sees people as individuals. Jeff needed healing and wholeness from what he was struggling with. You needed healing and wholeness from the trauma, from the betrayal, from the infidelity. And you both needed that space. Maybe Jeff, at the moment, you were like, I didn't think I needed it. I think I could do better. If we were together, two are better than one, as I hear some people try to use scripture in that way. But really, we didn't get to your whole story, so you'll have to kind of come back on at some
yeah,
point. But the therapeutic separation did help in each of you in your own individual healing. And I would imagine you're still in that process. You haven't like arrived to
mhm,
completely healed from that in 2020.
yep. And, you know, also therapeutic separation is just not a one and done because like I said, we have since been separated again for an even longer time than we were separated the first time. And it is, if there is um things happen, things come up. People that have addictions, like, they have a lot of shame and things, they may not disclose everything. And so, a year and a half later, something else was disclosed. It was devastating again. And the a different therapist, because I had moved on from the total sex addiction therapy to just a therapist, and couples therapy, the same advice. Like, you've got to separate so that you can, this is harming you, you need to heal. And I will say that it didn't take me as low as the first time because I've been doing work this whole time on myself and my trauma and my issues. But it's still, it was betrayal. And so, it's not always like a one and done. You separate, and people have to do what's right for them in their relationship. Like, he got to come back the first time because I thought, things were headed in the right direction, and then, it happened again. So,
So there was relapse. Well, I hate to like summarize because there's so much more we need to unpack, but so there wasn't like, oh yay, we had therapeutic separation, all went well, we got back together, and this is our happy ever after. You There was a relapse, there's another separation. So I want to kind of end with where we're at right now. So there's been two separations, we've come back together. Again, it's probably not a one and done. What would you kind of call the status of your relationship? Like, we're in maintenance, or we're still healing and growing, or Jeff, I'll throw that to you. So in this space, two separations, we're back together. Like, what is the relationship status, and what is it maybe you're still working on individually in this time?
So I think that it's been 4 years almost, and so I think that for me, it's switched more to the autism and relational issues, as opposed to the pornography and sex addiction issues. That's a little bit more on the back burner now. And so I've been working with an autism coach and more recently, autism therapist, and just trying to build relational skills and deal with kind of childhood wounds. I would say that's where I'm at now is shifting focus more towards the autism issues.
So skill building. So before where there's like, this is scary and there's anxiety and there's this coping mechanism. Now you've switched to, okay, there are actually skills that I can build. I can heal from childhood wounds and trauma, and I can build skills that give me more confidence in my relationship instead of relying on work for your
Yeah.
confidence.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. What about
Yeah.
you, Mary? Where are you in this whole process? And how do you kind of define the relationship? What's the DTR?
I would definitely say you're in a much better place, and I think the reason for that is that Jeff is like way more humble than he ever was before. Um, because of his intelligence, he always thought he was, and he's admitted this, like superior to the average human. And especially me. There's some misogyny in his family, and so he definitely was not respectful of me. And now he realizes that I have a lot to offer and that I have his best interest. Really, I'm not against him, I'm for him. And so he's way more um he listens to me way more, and he values my opinion more, and that has helped me to have more like trust, even though there's a long way to go as far as that, but it's kind of building incrementally. And so I would say that we are healing and growing still. I am healing and growing still. Continuing therapy, and also a big part of my life now that I've put my own mask on, my oxygen mask on, I am able to help others, and like I get such joy from being able to counsel women married to, autistic men, and help families who are struggling with their diagnosis. Just yesterday, I took on a new client who's a young adult lady with autism, and going to be doing some coaching for her. And so just being able to do that without being triggered and more, it's a joy. And so for myself, I'm starting to really come into my own again, come out of the Cassandra syndrome. I don't know what they call it now, but really just coming into my own. Our kids are doing so much better because we're doing better. And so, yeah, I would say optimism is sort of the word.
So I would say two things that I want to comment on your healing journey is one, Mary, you're in hearing lots of people's traumatic stories. The fact that you can hear that and it not trauma trigger you is definitely a point that
Mhm.
you are healing and growing through this, that you can do like in the Christian world, like take the pain, take the trauma and turn it into something good to help others on their journey. And I think you both being here today, being able to talk about this, although this is a very uncomfortable, often stigmatizing, shame inducing topic, that you're here today talking about it, not hiding behind the shame of it, is a really important step in your growth as a couple, to be able to trust each other, to be here, and that no one's going to throw each other under the bus. And we're going to talk about this because this is part of our story and we want to help other people. I think that's really important. Well, Dr. Mary has her own coaching practice. So I want to end with, if you have heard Dr. Mary and you want to work with her, and she has her own podcast. So will you tell people how to find your podcast and how to find you if they want to work with you?
So, my podcast is the Dr. Mary Podcast, and you can find that wherever you find your podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast. And my website is drmarycoaches.com. And Stephanie doesn't even know about this, but I just got ADOS 2 certified, and I'm starting my own practice diagnosing people with autism so that I can help to shorten wait times. And so I am now doing that. I'm currently getting credentialed with insurance, and so I will be taking insurance in Alabama, but also I will, do cash pay until I get credentialed in all the states that I'm licensed in. And so, if you are seeking a diagnosis for your child or yourself, you can go to drmarycoaches.com and just schedule an intro call and we can go from there.
All right, because I want to add this to my website too. So, are you only doing this in the state of Alabama, or are you doing some online as well? Or for your ADOS, you're doing it specifically for Alabama clients?
Yep. So I'm doing ADOS in person, and I will do cars, and I'm going to get some training in cars as well. So I'll be able to do online as well.
All right. Okay. We got to get together. We got to have some emails because I want people to know, especially in situations where someone can use their insurance if that's possible, but then
Yep.
cash pay of people who are autism adult trained. So that's new and exciting. It's like it's breaking news on First Christian Couples. Well, Dan and I thank y'all so much for being on the show today. And please check out Dr. Mary's podcast and her page. Any last thoughts before we kind of close up today, y'all?
Yeah, I would say we really appreciate you guys bringing us on and being so gentle. This is our first sort of foray into this and sort of our official coming out, I guess, party, if you could call it that. But we really want to get our story and our testimony out there to help as many people as we can. So we are open to being on other podcasts too.
All right. Well, we'll make those connections. So, listeners, as always, we remind you there is hope for your future and you're not alone on this journey.